A Grand Prix leader loses the lead to a car being lapped, and the man who hit him says the warning light never came on. That is the Hungarian Grand Prix on the 26th of July. 7 weeks earlier at Monaco, 5 drivers are penalized for pit lane, speeding by a timing system that was measuring the pit lane wrong by 77 centimetres. One of them loses a podium. 2 systems, 2 races, 1 season, and only one of those results ever got fixed. Lap 38 at the Hungarian, Oscar Piastri is leading the Hungarian Grand Prix. The Papaya McLaren comes down toward turn 2 with a Williams ahead of it, a car about to be lapped, a car that has no business being anywhere near the racing line. Carlos Sainz moves, the 2 cars touch. Piastri is pushed wide, off the tarmac, into the runoff, and by the time he is back on the road, the lead of the Hungarian Grand Prix belongs to Lando Norris. Piastri never gets it back. 18 laps later, his gearbox lets go and the McLaren rolls to a stop, retired, scoreless. Norris wins the race. It is his first victory of the 2026 season and his first as the reigning world champion, and he takes it by roughly 15 seconds over Max Verstappen, with Kimi Antonelli third. Sainz gets 5 seconds, not the usual 10 for causing a collision. 5. The stewards find a mitigating factor, and they cut the penalty in half. And when Sainz climbs out of the Williams and starts explaining what happened, he does not talk about misjudging a corner or losing grip on old tires. He talks about a light on his steering wheel. He says the blue lights on the wheel, the ones that normally tell a driver he is about to be lapped, were not there. He says without them, it was hard to understand whether he was being lapped or not. And that single detail turns a racing incident into something much larger. Because Sainz is not describing a mistake. He is describing a piece of Formula 1 safety equipment that did not work, and it had not been working since lap 6. Here is what the blue flag system is actually supposed to do, and it is far more automated than it looks from a sofa on a Sunday afternoon. Under Appendix H of the International Sporting Code, the light panels at the marshal posts carry exactly the same legal weight as a marshal waving a physical flag. Since 2015, those panels have been backed up by a second layer, a marshalling display built into the driver's steering wheel dashboard, so the warning arrives in the cockpit at the same instant it appears at the side of the track. For blue flags specifically, the system runs on prediction. It watches the gap between a leader and the car ahead of him. At around 3 seconds, it issues a pre-warning. At roughly 1 second, it goes blue on the panel and on the wheel. And critically, it shows the number of the car that is coming, which is the entire point of it. So the backmarker knows the warning is for him, knows who is arriving, and knows he has to get out of the way at the earliest opportunity. Ignore 3 of them in a row, and he is looking at a penalty. Everything else at a marshal post is manual. A marshal, watching his stretch of tarmac, presses a button, and that single press fires the signal 3 ways at once, to the light panel at his post, to race control, and to the dashboard inside the car. Yellow, red, green, all of it travels on that human input. The blue flag is the one signal in the entire system that the sport handed over to a computer, precisely because no human can track a full grid and calculate closing rates at racing speed. And all of that automation runs on one input: car position data, satellite tracking, fed live into race control, telling the system exactly where every car on the circuit is at any given moment. At the Hungarian, on the 26th of July, that data breaks. Formula 1 later explains the cause without much decoration. A communication issue with the position data, apparent in the early laps, giving drivers rogue warnings before any real lapping was happening at all. With the automation feeding garbage, race control makes the only call available and switches the automated blue flag system off entirely. What is left is the old world. Physical flags waved by marshals and light panels showing a plain blue with no car number attached to it. The failure starts on lap 6. The race runs 70 laps. Now think about what that actually means for a driver sitting in the car. He is being shown blue lights over and over, lap after lap, with no information about who they are for. He might be about to be lapped. He might equally be a lap down on nobody at all. Or he might be racing wheel to wheel with a car on the same lap as him, while a panel further up the road tells him to yield to a driver who is nowhere near him. Oliver Bearman describes it exactly like that. The Haas driver says the blue flag started for him after 6 laps and then kept coming, every single lap, from lap 6 until lap 70. His words are that it was really tough to know what was real, what was fake, what was for him and what was not. Esteban Ocon, his teammate, is blunter about the second layer. He says there was no feedback on the dash, nothing in the car at all, so the only thing available was the blue flag panels, and those panels were not showing car numbers. Then it gets stranger. Kimi Antonelli is running at the front of this Grand Prix, on his way to a podium. and he says he was being shown blue flags. In the cool-down room afterwards, Norris says the same thing about himself, that at one point they seem to be giving them to everybody, and that even he got one. The race leader's teammate is getting told to move over, for nobody. And on the radio, the frustration is not subtle. Verstappen comes on air about the Racing Bulls cars ahead of him and calls the situation ridiculous, tells his engineer they should be getting a penalty, and does not stop there. This is a four-time world champion in a Red Bull, on lap after lap of a Grand Prix, unable to get past cars that are supposed to be legally obligated to let him through. David Coulthard, watching from the commentary side, puts it in a sentence that stuck. He says it was like the first day of school, and that he means kindergarten, in the way drivers were reacting to blue flags. So the system is broken. Everybody in the paddock knows it is broken. 3 separate drivers describe the same confusion, and Formula One itself confirms the technical cause afterwards. Which is why what the stewards write about Carlos Sainz is the most uncomfortable document of the weekend. Sainz blames the missing blue light. The stewards do not accept it. Their decision, document 54, finds that the driver of car 55 was wholly responsible for the collision with car 81. Wholly, not partly, and not with any reduction for circumstances beyond his control. The mitigating factor that cuts his penalty from 10 seconds to 5 is not the broken system at all. It is that Piastri was in his blind spot at the moment of contact. That distinction matters enormously, and it is the hinge this whole story turns on. The stewards had every opportunity to write the words "marshalling system failure" into that document and reduce a driver's responsibility because of it. They chose not to. In their reading, the automation being down did not excuse anything, because the information reached Sainz anyway. It reached him by radio. His own Williams engineer had warned him that Piastri was coming. That is in the reasoning. And then there is the onboard camera. Footage from Sainz's car in the laps around the incident shows him passing flashing blue panels at the side of the track. They carried no car number, but they were blue, they were flashing, and they were unmissable. So the picture that emerges is not one broken thing. It is a chain of warnings that partially failed. The steering wheel display gave him nothing. The panels gave him a signal with no name on it. His engineer gave him the name, and the stewards decided that was enough. Bearman, meanwhile, gets 5 seconds of his own, and not for causing anything. His offense is ignoring blue flags relative to Isaac Hadjar. The same driver who spent 64 laps unable to tell which blue flags belonged to him is penalized for not responding to one of them correctly. Sit with that for a second, because it is the cleanest example of the whole problem. The sport builds an automated system to tell a driver when to move. The system stops telling him. He then gets punished under the regulation that assumes the system told him. There is no version of that sequence in which the driver has a way out, and no version in which the regulation is being applied to the situation it was actually written for. Read the 2 decisions side by side, and you find the thing that makes this story different from a normal Sunday afternoon controversy. The FIA's own automated safety system fails for 90% of a Grand Prix, and by the end of the day, 2 drivers have been punished and 0 penalties have been withdrawn. Not one result changes. Norris wins, Verstappen is second, Antonelli is third, and the classification that goes into the record book is the classification that came off the track. That is Hungary. A failure that cost a race leader the lead, cost McLaren the 1-2 it was running at the time, and cost the sport nothing at all in the way of corrections. There is one more line on the Hungary results sheet, and almost nobody connected it to anything. Lewis Hamilton crosses the finish line 4th. He is classified 5th. The reason is a 5-second penalty for speeding in the pit lane, and the margin the timing system recorded against him is around 1/10 of a kilometre per hour over the limit. A car on a pit limiter, in a red Ferrari, in the closing stages of a Grand Prix, losing a position to his own teammate over 1/10. Hold on to that number. It is about to appear again, in a different country, attached to a driver who lost considerably more than 1 place because of it. Now, pull the timeline back 7 weeks. Because Hungary is not the first time in 2026 that a piece of Formula One measurement technology has decided a Grand Prix, and the earlier one is worse, because at Monaco the machine went further than failing to warn anybody. It manufactured offences that never happened. While Hungary was still 2 months away, something odd was already sitting in the Monaco results sheet, and almost nobody read it correctly at the time. The Monaco Grand Prix, 7th of June, round 6 of 23, 78 laps around the Armco and the harbour front. On the one circuit on the calendar where the pit lane is narrow, awkward, and threaded between the barriers rather than laid out flat behind a straight. Kimi Antonelli wins it. Hamilton crosses the line just over 6 seconds behind him. Isaac Hadjar takes the third step of the podium on the road, and then the penalties start landing, and they keep landing. And by the end of the afternoon, the stewards have handed 5 different drivers a 5-second time penalty for speeding in that pit lane: Lewis Hamilton, George Russell, Pierre Gasly, Oscar Piastri, and Franco Colapinto. 5. In one race, at one circuit, for the same offence. George Russell says on Sky what half the paddock is thinking, that there was clearly something wrong at Monaco, because there were more pit lane speeding penalties in that single race than there normally are in an entire season. Gasly gets 2 of them. 2 separate 5-second penalties, 10 seconds in total, and the numbers involved are almost comically small. On one, he is recorded at 0.1 kilometers per hour over the 60 kilometer per hour limit. On the other, 0.4. That is 1/10 of a kilometer per hour. A car on a pit limiter, a device whose entire job is to make speeding physically impossible, is being told it went 1/10 of a kilometer per hour too fast. Gasly crosses the line 3rd. He is classified 7th. An Alpine podium, the kind of result that team had not had in a very long time, deleted by a rounding error, except it is not a rounding error. Alpine files for a right of review under Article 14 of the International Sporting Code, and when the sport actually goes and measures the pit lane, it finds something that should never have been possible. Formula One Management, the organization responsible for official timing, calculates pit lane speed by measuring how long a car takes to cover a known distance between 2 timing loops in the ground. Distance divided by time and nothing else, which means the number that comes out is only ever as accurate as the distance that goes in. The distance that went in for the first pit entry zone at Monaco was logged as 26.92 meters. When the zone was properly scanned after the race, the shortest possible line through it measured 26.15 meters, 77 centimeters, less than the length of a Formula One front wing. And because the system believed the cars were covering more ground than they actually were in the time recorded, every speed it calculated in that zone came out too high. On the 11th of June, Formula One management concedes it. The distance used was inaccurate, and it overestimated the speed Gasly was travelling at. The stewards rescind both of his penalties. He is restored to 3rd. Isaac Hadjar drops to 4th, Piastri to 5th, Liam Lawson to 6th, Arvid Lindblad to 7th. Gasly gets his podium back 4 days after he lost it. If you want more breakdowns like this one, the ones that go past the highlights and into the documents, subscribe. It genuinely helps, and there is a new one every week. It is worth being exact about who owns that mistake, because the paddock was careful about it at the time, and the distinction is not a technicality. Formula One management runs the timing on the commercial side of the sport. FIA stewards issue the penalties on the sporting side. So, one side of the house took the measurement, and the other side handed down the punishment. That split ought to work as a safeguard. 2 organizations, 2 sets of eyes, 2 chances to notice that a car on a limiter cannot physically speed. Instead, it functioned as a conveyor belt. The number arrived from the timing system. The stewards applied the regulation that number triggered, and nobody in the chain stopped to ask why a device designed to make an offense impossible had apparently allowed it 5 separate times in one afternoon. And that is where the second failure stops being a story about one driver and becomes a story about the whole system, because the other 4 drivers on that list get nothing. Hamilton, Russell, Piastri, and Colapinto had already served their penalties during the race. 5 seconds each, taken at a pit stop or added at the flag, absorbed into a result that then played out over the remaining laps. You cannot unserve a penalty. You cannot rewind a Grand Prix and give a driver back the track position he defended differently because he was carrying 5 seconds he did not owe. So the sport ends up in a position where it has formally admitted the measurement was wrong, corrected the one driver whose team filed the paperwork in time, and left 4 others carrying the consequences of an offence that the governing body now accepts did not occur. McLaren does not accept that. Neither does Red Bull. On the 16th of June, both teams lodge appeals with the FIA International Court of Appeal against the Monaco decisions. 3 separate documents, 99, 100 and 101. Mercedes files its own right of review and then withdraws it on the 18th. An appeal to that court is not a letter of complaint. An appellant lodges a filing fee and a deposit against it, heard by a panel outside the race weekend entirely, and it is the last mechanism the sport has. Once the International Court of Appeal has ruled, there is nowhere else inside Formula One to take it. As of the end of July, that appeal has still not been heard, with no date announced and no verdict handed down. The Monaco classification, 7 weeks and 5 race weekends later, is still provisional, which means the Drivers' Championship, the Constructors' Championship, and every points total quoted on every broadcast since the 7th of June have been carrying an asterisk that almost nobody mentions. Only a small one, worth a handful of points across 4 drivers. But in a season where the top 3 in the standings are separated by 59 points, with 12 races left, a handful of points is not a rounding error either. Nobody was paying much attention to the state of race control before this season started. It had been a quiet corner of the sport for a while, staffed by people whose names a viewer never needed to learn. That is not true anymore. The current Formula One race director is Rui Marquez, appointed in November 2024 after Niels Wittich was removed from the role before that season had finished. Above all of it sits Mohammed Ben Sulayem, re-elected as FIA president unopposed in December 2025 in Tashkent, in an election that drew enough controversy to end up in front of a French court, with proceedings beginning in February of this year. This is the institution now being asked to explain why its automated blue flag system fed drivers false information for 64 laps of a Grand Prix, and why its timing partner spent a Monaco afternoon inventing pit lane speeding offences out of 77 missing centimetres. And the responses tell you how raw it still is. Toto Wolff, live on Sky after the Hungarian Grand Prix, opens by saying the marshalling system was not functioning, that cars at the back were defending while Hamilton and Antonelli were fighting behind them. Then he uses the word that travelled furthest: disgraceful. Worth being precise about who he aimed it at, because it was not race control. He aimed it at the engineers on rival pit walls, the ones he called Teletubbies, for not telling their own drivers what was happening behind them, which is a strange and revealing place for a team principal's anger to land. When the sport's central signalling system goes dark, the argument does not stay between the teams and the governing body. It fractures sideways into the teams accusing each other of exploiting the blackout, because that is the part nobody in a press conference wants to say plainly. A blue flag system that cannot name the car it is warning about becomes something worse than confusing. It becomes deniable. Every driver who is slow to move can say he did not know it was for him, and the telemetry will not contradict him. 64 laps is a long time to run a Grand Prix on plausible deniability. Coulthard's kindergarten line lands because it captures the visual, the best drivers on earth reacting to signals nobody trusted. Russell's more this race than a whole season line lands because it captures the arithmetic that should have triggered an investigation at Monaco long before an appeal forced one. So where does this actually sit as Formula One goes into its summer break? Kimi Antonelli leads the Drivers' Championship on 219 points. Hamilton is second on 169, Russell third on 160, then Leclerc on 138, Norris on 128, Verstappen on 109, and Piastri, who was leading the Hungarian Grand Prix on lap 38, on 92. Mercedes leads the Constructors' Championship on 379, from Ferrari on 307, McLaren on 220, Red Bull on 177. Look at what lap 38 actually cost inside one team. Piastri was leading, Norris was second. On the numbers as they stood at that moment, McLaren was heading for a 1-2, and Piastri was heading for the 25. Instead, Piastri banks nothing, Norris banks the win. And the swing between two teammates in the same garage over the space of 18 laps is worth more than any single overtake in the race. Antonelli's lead is 50 points, with 11 of 23 rounds gone. 12 races remain, and the next one is Zandvoort on the 21st of August, on a circuit where backmarkers and leaders share the same narrow-banked corners for the entire lap. Two things are still unresolved going into it, and both of them belong to the FIA rather than to any team. The first is the appeal. McLaren and Red Bull are still waiting for the International Court of Appeal to rule on whether 4 drivers can be given back something the sport already agrees they should never have lost. No precedent makes that easy. There is also no version of the sport where leaving it unanswered looks acceptable. The second is the one nobody has been given an answer to at all. There is no numbered FIA document explaining the Hungary failure. There is a statement from Formula One about position data. There is paddock reporting, and there is a steward's decision that pointedly declined to treat the failure as an excuse for anything. What there is not is a published account of why the system stayed down for 64 laps, or what stops it happening again at a circuit where the consequences are not a lost lead, but a car parked in a gravel trap with a Grand Prix bearing down on it. 7 weeks apart, 2 measurement systems fed Formula One bad information. One took a podium and gave it back. The other took the lead of a Grand Prix and gave nothing back at all. Zandvoort is just over 3 weeks away. If you want the next one of these the moment it drops, subscribe. Next up is the full breakdown of what Piastri's Hungary retirement actually does to McLaren's title maths, and it is closer than the standings make it look.